emotional, predictable, or impossible to read. This is exactly how emotional manipulation works. The manipulator throws a small emotional trigger and waits. If you become angry, defensive, or desperate to prove yourself, you've just revealed something valuable. You've shown them where your ego is sensitive. You've shown them what hurts you. And once someone discovers your emotional weak point, they can press it again and again whenever they want. What looked like a simple argument was actually an information gathering process. Robert Greene repeatedly teaches that power belongs to the person who reveals the least about themselves. Every emotional reaction is a form of exposure. Your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your rushed replies, and your desperate need to defend yourself all tell a story. While you believe you're protecting your reputation, you're actually handing over a map of your mind. Look closely at the people who naturally command respect. They aren't respected because they speak the loudest. They're respected because they don't allow temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. When others become emotional, they become observant. When others rush to respond, they slow down. That difference separates powerful people from predictable people. Think about how many conflicts could have been avoided if someone had simply refused to react. A careless insult loses its power when it receives no emotional response. A manipulator becomes frustrated when their tactics stop working. Someone trying to embarrass you in public suddenly loses confidence when they realize you refuse to play the role they expected. Your calmness forces them to face their own behavior instead of controlling yours. This doesn't mean you should accept disrespect or become passive. It means you should never allow another person's actions to decide your emotional state. Respond when it serves your purpose, not when your emotions demand it. There is a huge difference between a calculated response and an emotional reaction. One is strategy, the other is surrender. The strongest people understand something that most never learn. Every unnecessary reaction is expensive. It costs peace of mind, clear judgment, and sometimes even your reputation. But when you remain calm under pressure, something remarkable happens. People stop seeing you as easy to manipulate. They become uncertain because they can no longer predict you. And in psychology, uncertainty creates power. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, don't ask yourself how to win the argument. Ask yourself something far more important. Why are they trying so hard to make me react? The moment you answer that question, you've already taken back the control they were hoping to steal. And once you stop reacting, you'll realize that explaining yourself is another trap intelligent people never fall into. Most people think explaining themselves makes them appear honest, intelligent, and trustworthy. Whenever someone questions their decisions, they immediately begin defending their actions. They explain why they did something, what their intentions were, and why they deserve to be understood. But Robert Greene warns that this habit quietly destroys your power. The more you feel the need to explain yourself, the more you reveal that your confidence depends on other people's approval. And in the world of power, the person who constantly seeks approval is rarely the person in control. Human nature has always been drawn to certainty. People naturally respect individuals who stand by their decisions without feeling the need to justify every move. On the other hand, excessive explanations often create the opposite effect. Instead of convincing people, they invite more questions, more doubts, and more criticism. The moment you start defending yourself unnecessarily, the conversation is no longer about your decision. It becomes about whether your explanation is convincing enough. Without realizing it, you've handed control of the situation to someone else. Robert Greene often explains that power belongs to those who speak with intention, not those who speak out of insecurity. Every unnecessary explanation reveals a piece of your emotional state. It tells people what you're afraid of losing. It exposes what you desperately want others to believe about you. And once people recognize that need, They know exactly where your emotional weakness lies. This is one of the oldest principles of dark psychology. Manipulative people rarely ask questions because they genuinely need answers. Many of them ask questions simply to make you talk. Every sentence you add gives them more material to analyze. They notice your hesitation, your emotional tone, your attempts to justify yourself, and even the subjects that make you uncomfortable. While you think you're clearing up misunderstandings, they're quietly collecting psychological information that can be used against you later. Think about someone who always feels the need to explain why they replied late, why they made a certain decision, why they refused a request, or why they chose a different path in life. Over time, they unknowingly train others to expect explanations for everything. The moment they stop explaining, people become offended because they've grown accustomed to controlling that person's behavior. This is how unnecessary explanations slowly become invisible chains. Now compare that with someone who remains calm and simply says, "That's my decision." They don't argue. They don't over-defend themselves. They don't waste energy trying to convince people who have already decided to judge them. Their confidence comes from clarity, not from approval. Ironically, this quiet certainty often earns more respect than the longest explanation ever could. Robert Greene reminds us that mystery is one of the foundations of influence. The less predictable you become, the harder it is for others to manipulate you. When people don't know every thought in your mind, they cannot easily calculate your next move. But the moment you explain every action, every emotion, and every intention, you become completely readable. And a readable person is always easier to influence than a mysterious one. This doesn't mean you should never communicate with people who genuinely deserve honesty. Healthy relationships require openness and trust. But there is a difference between communicating with purpose and explaining yourself out of fear. One comes from confidence. The other comes from insecurity. Powerful people understand this difference, which is why they choose carefully who deserves an explanation and who deserves nothing at all. Remember this: your life is not a courtroom, and you are not obligated to defend every decision you make. The strongest people let their actions speak louder than their explanations. They understand that those who truly respect them won't demand constant justification, and those determined to misunderstand them will never be satisfied, no matter how much they explain. Once you stop reacting and stop explaining, you'll discover why the most powerful response is often to simply ignore what doesn't deserve your attention. Most people believe that ignoring someone is a sign of weakness. They assume that if they don't respond to an insult, defend themselves against criticism, or confront every act of disrespect, they will lose people's respect. But Robert Greene teaches a completely different lesson. He explains that power is not measured by how many battles you fight. It is measured by how many battles you refuse to fight. The strongest people understand that attention is a valuable resource, and they never waste it on people who haven't earned it. Sometimes, the greatest victory is achieved without saying a single word. Human nature craves attention more than approval. This is one of the oldest principles of dark psychology. Many people don't provoke you because they hate you. They provoke you because they want to become the center of your attention. They understand that the moment you react, you've already accepted their invitation into a psychological game. Whether you argue, defend yourself, or become angry doesn't matter. What matters is that they now occupy space in your mind. And once someone controls your attention, they begin influencing your emotions without ever touching you. Robert Greene observed that history's most powerful individuals rarely reacted to every challenge thrown at them. They understood that every unnecessary conflict carries a hidden cost. Time is lost, mental clarity disappears, emotional discipline weakens. While ordinary people spend hours arguing with critics, powerful people continue building their future. They understand that success grows in silence, while distractions grow through attention. Dark psychology works because most people are emotionally predictable. A manipulator doesn't need extraordinary intelligence to control someone. They simply need to discover what consistently gets a reaction. Once they identify that trigger, they repeat it. Every insult becomes a test. Every criticism becomes bait. Every disrespectful action is designed to pull you into an emotional battle. The moment you react, you've confirmed that they have found the key to your emotions. But when you calmly ignore the bait, their strategy begins to collapse. They expected access to your mind and found a locked door instead. This is why strategic ignoring is so powerful. It isn't about pretending people don't exist or avoiding every disagreement. It is about refusing to reward manipulation with attention. Human behavior follows reinforcement. Whatever receives emotional energy tends to continue. If someone insults you and receives anger in return, they've achieved exactly what they wanted. But when they receive nothing, no frustration, no argument, no emotional response, the game suddenly becomes meaningless. Without attention, manipulation loses its fuel. Notice how people become uncomfortable when they can no longer predict your reactions. Someone who expected an argument begins wondering why you're silent. Someone who wanted your attention suddenly starts chasing yours. This is the psychological power of absence. Robert Greene often reminds us that mystery creates influence. The less people can read your emotions, the more they begin creating stories in their own minds. Your silence becomes louder than their words, because uncertainty is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Of course, ignoring should never come from fear or insecurity. Running away from problems is not power. Strategic ignoring is a conscious decision made from strength. It means recognizing that not every opinion deserves your attention, not every insult deserves your response, and not every person deserves access to your peace of mind. The most successful individuals are not respected because they answer everyone. They are respected because they know exactly where their attention belongs and where it doesn't. Remember this. Every time you choose peace over pointless conflict, you protect something more valuable than your reputation. You protect your mind. And once people realize they can no longer control your attention, they also lose the ability to control your emotions. That is the moment you stop becoming an easy target and start becoming someone difficult to manipulate. And once you've mastered the art of ignoring distractions, you're ready to discover the dark psychological habits that quietly make people respect you without asking for it. Most people believe that respect is earned by speaking louder, proving themselves, or constantly demanding recognition. They think power comes from being noticed, admired, or feared. But Robert Greene reveals something far more unsettling. The people who naturally command the most respect rarely ask for it. They understand that respect is not something you chase. It is something you quietly create through your behavior. And the foundation of that respect lies in mastering a few psychological habits that most people completely overlook. The first habit is becoming emotionally unreadable. Human nature is built on prediction. People feel comfortable when they know exactly how you will react. If they know an insult will make you angry, or praise will make you dependent on their approval, they can easily influence your behavior. This is why manipulators constantly observe emotional patterns. They study your reactions until they discover what controls you. Robert Greene warns that the more predictable your emotions become, the easier you are to manipulate. But when your reactions remain calm and measured, people lose the ability to calculate their next move. Uncertainty replaces certainty, and uncertainty quietly creates respect. The second habit is rewarding respect while completely ignoring disrespect. Most people do the exact opposite. They spend hours arguing with critics while taking loyal people for granted. Dark psychology teaches that attention is reinforcement. Whatever receives your emotional energy becomes stronger. When you reward disrespect with arguments and frustration, you encourage it to continue. But when you calmly withdraw your attention from toxic behavior while giving your energy to people who genuinely deserve it, you completely change the psychological dynamic. People quickly learn that your attention is earned, not freely available. The third habit is refusing to argue with emotional people. This is one of Robert Greene's most practical lessons. An emotional person is rarely searching for truth. They're searching for emotional victory. The more logical your arguments become, the more emotional they often become because their goal was never understanding. It was winning. The moment you recognize this, you stop wasting your intelligence on conversations that cannot be won. Silence becomes more effective than explanation because it denies emotional people the conflict they desperately wanted. The fourth habit is allowing silence to create curiosity. Human beings naturally dislike unanswered questions. When someone cannot easily understand your thoughts, your intentions, or your next move, they begin filling the silence with their own imagination. Robert Greene often explains that mystery increases influence because people value what they cannot completely understand. This doesn't mean pretending to be mysterious. It means resisting the urge to reveal every opinion, every plan, and every emotion the moment you feel it. The less you reveal without purpose, the more your words begin carrying weight. The fifth habit is never chasing validation. This is where many people unknowingly surrender their power. They seek approval through social media, relationships, careers, and even simple conversations. They constantly look for reassurance that they're respected, attractive, intelligent, or successful. But the moment your confidence depends on someone else's approval, you've placed your emotional stability in another person's hands. Robert Greene reminds us that true confidence is quiet because it doesn't need constant confirmation. People naturally respect those who already respect themselves. The sixth habit is making your absence meaningful. Human nature often overlooks what is always available. People appreciate what becomes limited. This doesn't mean playing childish games or disappearing to manipulate others. It means building a life so focused on purpose that your time becomes valuable. When you are constantly available to everyone, your presence slowly loses significance. But when people realize your attention is selective, your presence becomes something they value instead of something they expect. Notice how all of these habits share one principle. None of them require force, aggression, or endless words. They require discipline. The greatest psychological advantage is not making people fear you. It is making them realize they cannot easily influence you. Once people understand that your emotions cannot be bought, your attention cannot be stolen, and your confidence cannot be shaken, respect begins to appear naturally without you ever demanding it. And once these habits become part of your character, you'll see why toxic people are the first to lose control when they can no longer control you. Most people think toxic people are naturally powerful. They seem confident, fearless, and always in control of every situation. They know how to manipulate conversations, create guilt, provoke emotions, and make others question themselves. Because of this, many people assume the only way to deal with them is to argue harder, expose them publicly, or defeat them in their own game. But Robert Greene teaches a lesson that completely changes this perspective. The greatest weakness of a manipulative person is not a lack of intelligence. It's their dependence on controlling other people's emotions. The moment they lose that control, they begin losing control of themselves. Human nature seeks control because control creates security. Toxic people understand this better than most. They carefully observe your habits, your emotional triggers, and your need for approval. They learn what makes you angry, what makes you feel guilty, and what makes you desperate to defend yourself. Then they repeat those behaviors because they know you'll respond exactly the same way every time. In their mind, predictability equals power. As long as they can predict your reaction, they believe they control the relationship. This is why Robert Greene constantly emphasizes emotional discipline. He understood that the easiest person to manipulate is the one whose emotions are visible. Every angry reaction, every defensive explanation, and every emotional argument gives toxic people exactly what they were searching for. That they still have influence over your mind. They don't always need you to agree with them. They simply need you to react. Your reaction becomes proof that they still occupy space in your thoughts. Dark psychology explains that many manipulators survive on emotional reinforcement. Every time you argue, they feel important. Every time you chase closure, they feel powerful. Every time you try to make them understand your side of the story, they know they're still directing your attention. This is why some people deliberately create confusion. Confused people ask more questions, explain more, and become emotionally exhausted. Meanwhile, the manipulator quietly enjoys the psychological advantage. But something remarkable happens when you stop reacting, stop explaining, and begin protecting your attention. The balance of power changes immediately. The manipulator expects anger but finds calm. They expect long messages but receive silence. They expect emotional resistance but discover complete indifference. Suddenly, the strategy that worked for years begins to fail. Without your emotional response, they lose the feedback they depended on. And when that feedback disappears, uncertainty begins to replace confidence. Robert Greene often observed that people become uncomfortable when they can no longer predict someone. Mystery creates tension because the human mind naturally wants certainty. When a toxic person realizes they can no longer read your emotions, they begin questioning themselves. They replay conversations in their mind. They wonder why their usual tactics no longer work. Ironically, the person who once studied your behavior now becomes trapped studying theirs. The hunter slowly becomes the one searching for answers. Notice how manipulators often become more emotional after losing control. They may increase their criticism, spread rumors, play the victim, or suddenly become unusually kind. None of these behaviors happen by accident. They are attempts to regain the emotional access they once had. Human nature struggles to accept losing influence, especially over someone who was once predictable. This is why many toxic people become desperate when their old methods stop producing results. This doesn't mean your goal should be to punish people or make them suffer. Robert Greene's philosophy has never been about revenge. It has always been about protecting your own position. The moment your peace no longer depends on another person's behavior, you become psychologically free. You stop measuring your value through their approval, their attention, or their opinions, and that freedom is something no manipulator can easily defeat. Remember this: toxic people appear powerful only as long as someone continues feeding them emotional energy. The moment you refuse to provide it, their influence begins to disappear. Real power has never belonged to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one whose mind cannot be controlled. And once you understand why manipulators lose control when they can't control you, the final step is learning how emotional detachment makes you truly untouchable. Bill Cool. Yi Key Point 6 Ka 1010 Premium Version High. Main I say Robert Greene Key Philosophy, Dark Psychology, Human Nature or YouTube documentary style ka mutabiklika high. Isma Peli 5 points ka surf natural continuation high. Unnecessary recap nahi. Most people spend their lives trying to become stronger by changing the people around them. They try to make others respect them, understand them, love them, or treat them differently. But Robert Greene believed that this is where most people lose their power. The world has always been unpredictable. People will disappoint you, criticize you, betray you, and test your patience. You cannot control any of that. The only thing that has ever belonged completely to you is your response. The moment you master that, you become someone the world can no longer manipulate. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. People mistake it for being cold, heartless, or indifferent. In reality, it is none of those things. Emotional detachment is the ability to feel without becoming controlled by what you feel. It is caring without becoming dependent. It is loving without losing yourself. It is remaining calm even when everyone around you is trying to pull you into emotional chaos. This is why Robert Greene considered self-mastery the highest form of power. Anyone can control their emotions when life is easy. Only a disciplined person can control them when life becomes difficult. Human nature has a weakness that few people ever recognize. We become attached to things that were never meant to define us. We become attached to people's opinions, to recognition, to constant attention, and to the desire to always be understood. At first, these attachments feel harmless, but over time they quietly become chains. The moment your confidence depends on praise, criticism becomes your weakness. The moment your happiness depends on someone's attention, their absence becomes your suffering. And the moment your peace depends on another person's behavior, you've unknowingly handed them control over your emotional life. Dark psychology works because it feeds on these attachments. Manipulators don't create your emotional weaknesses. They simply discover them. They notice your fear of rejection, your need for validation, your desire to prove yourself, or your inability to let go. Then they use those needs as invisible strings. Every compliment, every insult, every moment of silence, and every act of attention becomes a tool to influence your decisions. But when you no longer depend on those things, something extraordinary happens. The strings disappear. And a person without strings cannot be controlled. This is why emotionally independent people seem different. They don't panic when someone leaves. They don't chase people who ignore them. They don't waste energy proving themselves to those who have already decided not to understand them. Their confidence is built on discipline rather than approval. They know their value doesn't increase because someone praises them, and it doesn't decrease because someone criticizes them. That inner stability makes them incredibly difficult to manipulate because their emotions are no longer available for other people to use. Robert Greene often reminds us that the greatest form of influence comes from self-control. History remembers people who remained composed while everyone else surrendered to emotion. They understood something that most people never learn. Every emotional impulse is temporary, but the consequences of acting on it can last for years. This is why powerful people pause before they respond, observe before they trust, and think before they act. Their greatest advantage is not intelligence alone, it's discipline. Look back at everything you've learned. When you refuse to react, you protect your emotions. When you refuse to explain yourself unnecessarily, you protect your confidence. When you ignore people who seek to manipulate you, you protect your attention. These are not separate habits. They are different expressions of the same principle. Mastering yourself before someone else masters you. And once self-mastery becomes your habit, people lose the ability to disturb your peace because they no longer have access to your emotional world. Remember this. The world will always try to provoke you. It will demand your reaction, your explanation, and your attention. Most people will surrender all three without realizing what they've lost. But the few who master emotional detachment become untouchable. They don't win because they are louder, stronger, or more aggressive. They win because they refuse to let anyone else decide how they think, how they feel, or how they live. That is the quiet power Robert Greene spent a lifetime teaching. A power that no one can steal because it comes from mastering yourself, not controlling others. Master